The rain had been a constant companion for 3 days, a monotonous drumbeat against the window of the roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange. Each drop seemed to carry the weight of my own unending sorrow, splattering the grimy pane with a melancholic rhythm. I watched it now, a blurry curtain separating me from the world I no longer recognized. My wife, Elara, had been gone for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and the sharp edges of grief still lacerated me with every breath, every memory, every vacant space in our once vibrant home. I pushed away the lukewarm coffee, its bitter taste doing nothing to cut through the thick fog in my head. The motel room reeked of stale cigarette smoke and something else, something vaguely metallic, like old pennies left too long in a damp jar. The bedspread, a faded floral pattern, felt rough beneath my fingertips. This place, a forgotten stop on a forgotten highway, was a temporary purgatory. I had been driving for days, a desperate, directionless flight from the silence of our house, from the phantom scent of her perfume that still clung to the fabric of my life. The decision had come to me somewhere between a gas station with flickering fluorescent lights and a diner where the waitress stared too long at my haggard face. My grandmother's house. The old manor, tucked away in the foothills, a place I'd never known, never visited, a legacy of an estranged branch of my family tree. He had passed a few months before Elara, a distant, almost forgotten relative whose will had named me, her only living descendant, as the sole inheritor. I had dismissed it then, a faded legal document lost in the deluge of my immediate pain. But now it called to me, a remote fortress against the world, a place where no one knew my story, where no one would offer platitudes or pitying glances. A fresh start, or perhaps just a place to finally fall apart unobserved. I walked to the door, the cheap carpet squishing slightly underfoot. The air outside was heavy, pregnant with more rain. Across the small, potholed parking lot, the motel office glowed with a single anemic bulb. The owner, a man with eyes too wide and an unsettling stillness about him, watched me from behind the counter. He was always there, always watching, even when I knew I was the only guest. His gaze felt like a physical weight pressing against my temples. He never spoke beyond the bare minimum, yet his silence was more profound, more unnerving than any chatter. He'd merely nodded when I'd asked for a second night, his head tilting just a fraction too far. I pulled the worn leather satchel from the passenger seat of my car, its contents a haphazard collection of clothes, Elara's favorite scarf, and the heavy iron key to the manor. The key felt cold in my palm, a tangible anchor to this new, uncertain path. The owner's eyes followed me as I started the car, a slow, deliberate turn of his head. I felt a prickle of unease, a familiar sensation these days, like a phantom itch beneath my skin. He just stood there unmoving until my car was out of sight, swallowed by the winding, rain-slicked road. What was he thinking? The drive was long, the paved road gradually giving way to gravel, then finally to a narrow, overgrown track barely wide enough for my tires. Trees, ancient and gnarled, formed a dense canopy overhead, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. My phone had lost signal miles ago, severing the last fragile thread to the outside world. I was truly alone now, driving deeper into the embrace of isolation. And then through a break in the trees, I saw it. The manor. Victorian. The real estate agent had called it, but that word felt too quaint, too delicate for the imposing structure before me. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the facade, consuming portions of the walls, giving the house the appearance of being slowly devoured by the earth itself. A shiver, unrelated to the plummeting temperature, traced a path down my spine. This wasn't a fresh start, it was an ending, or perhaps a beginning of something else entirely. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water from the eaves and the distant rustle of unseen leaves. The air here was heavy, still, carrying a faint, musty scent like old paper and forgotten secrets. My heart, which had been a dull, aching throb for weeks, now began to beat with a strange, nervous energy. I swallowed, the dryness in my throat sudden and acute. It looked less like an invitation and more like a wound. Had I forgotten to lock it? Or had it always been this way, an open maw waiting for its next meal? A gust of wind, sudden and sharp, whistled through the gap, carrying with it a sound like a sigh. A blurry curtain of water that distorted the world outside, just as my grief distorted my own. The roadside motel only guest, owner acting strange, felt like a holding cell. Every time I stepped out of my room, I felt the proprietor's gaze on my back, a prickle of unwarranted attention that made my skin crawl. He never spoke, just watched from behind the counter, a silent, gaunt sentinel. The silence of the place, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain, amplified the hollow ache in my chest. I couldn't stay here not another night. The house, my grandmother's house, waited. A fresh start, they said. A change of scenery. A lie I knew, but a necessary one. The drive was a blur of slick asphalt and towering, rain-lashed pines. The old truck, packed with the few belongings I'd salvaged, groaned with every turn. The road narrowed, eventually becoming a gravel track that wound deeper into the woods, the canopy overhead growing thicker, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My hands gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. Each mile felt like a step further into an older, forgotten world. When the house finally loomed into view, it was less a welcome and more an accusation. A skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, the Victorian manor was a testament to neglect. Gables sagged, paint peeled in long, curling strips, and the porch steps seemed to sigh under the weight of years. A single gnarled oak, its branches like arthritic fingers, clawed at the slate roof. No lights, no sound but the wind whistling through cracked window panes. The front door, a heavy slab of rotting oak, groaned open with a sound like a tortured beast. A plume of dust, disturbed by my entrance, danced in the anemic light filtering through the grimy fanlight above. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the cloying scent of mildew, forgotten spices, and something else, something subtly metallic and sweet, like old blood and dried flowers. My boots scuffed on the dust-laden floorboards of the grand foyer. I started on the ground floor, moving from room to room like a phantom, my flashlight beam cutting swaths through the gloom. The dining room with its massive, sheet-draped table felt like a tomb. Dust motes swirled in the beam, tiny galaxies in the stagnant air. I ran a hand over a sheet, feeling the gritty texture of accumulated time. Every surface was filmed with a fine, gray powder. A sudden click echoed from the far end of the hallway. I froze, my heart giving a clumsy thump against my ribs. The sound was distinct, mechanical. The old house settling, I told myself, the timbers groaning under the shift in temperature. A draft, perhaps, finding its way through a loose window pane. I swallowed, the taste in my mouth like ash. I found the study next, a smaller room tucked away behind the main staircase. Here, the sheets were absent, revealing a grand mahogany desk buried under stacks of yellowed papers and leather-bound books. My breath plumed faintly in front of me. I shivered, rubbing my arms. The house was old, drafty, nothing more. My gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the desk, half hidden beneath a stack of ledgers. I picked it up, blowing away a layer of dust. It was a formal portrait, sepia-toned, of a severe-looking woman with my grandmother's eyes, though younger, harder. Beside her stood a man, his face a grim mask, and two children, their expressions unnervingly blank. One of the children, a girl, held a doll, its porcelain face cracked, one eye missing. The details were unsettling, but it was the woman's eyes that held me, peering out from the past with an unsettling intensity. My ancestors, they all looked so. Heavy, burdened, it was indistinct, a mere suggestion of sound, a sigh of air. I spun around, flashlight beam darting, but found nothing. My mind was playing tricks, I decided. Grief and exhaustion, a potent cocktail. I had been under immense stress. Upstairs, the silence was even deeper, punctuated only by the creak of my own footsteps on the complaining floorboards, more shrouded furniture, more dust. The bedrooms felt empty, yet watched. I pushed open the door to what must have been my grandmother's room. It was different, less shrouded, though still thick with dust. In the corner of the room, half hidden by a heavy, moth-eaten tapestry, I spotted it. A chest. Intricate, almost alien symbols were carved into its lid, swirling lines that seemed to writhe in the dim light. No, not alien, just old, very old. A heavy, ornate lock, dull with age, secured the front. It was clearly designed to keep something in or out. My fingers traced the strange carvings. They felt familiar somehow, like a half-forgotten dream. A sudden, sharp rapping came from somewhere below, a distinct thump-thump-thump. It wasn't the house settling this time. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. My breath hitched. I stood absolutely still, straining my ears, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand. The house was silent again, but the sound had been undeniable. What had made it? The roadside motel only guest, owner acting strange, hummed with a low, electrical thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the only sound besides the insistent drip of the faucet in my room's cramped bathroom, a monotonous pulse against the quiet. I tried to tighten it, but the ancient brass handle only twisted loosely in my hand, refusing to yield. Every time I stepped out, whether for a forgotten item from the truck or just to breathe the damp, cool air, I felt the proprietor's eyes on me. A heavy, unwavering weight on my back, a prickle that wasn't quite hostile but certainly wasn't welcoming. It was the gaze of someone watching a specimen in a jar, expectant. I'd tried to dismiss it, to tell myself it was just the isolation, strangeness of the place. My nerves, frayed and raw since her death, were playing tricks. But the proprietor, a gaunt man with eyes like polished river stones, never seemed to move from his perch behind the dusty counter. He just was there, always there, head slightly cocked, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips when our eyes met. He didn't speak beyond the initial transaction, yet his silence was louder than any greeting. That afternoon I tried to write, to capture something, anything, of the swirling chaos in my head. The pen felt alien in my hand, the paper stark white and unforgiving. The motel room itself seemed to press in, the faded wallpaper a sickly floral pattern that crawled up the walls, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and something faintly metallic like old pennies. I pushed the pad away, got up, and walked to the window. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, blurring the desolate stretch of highway outside into a gray smear. Then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a sigh. It was right behind me, I was sure of it. The hair on my arm stood on end. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. The room was empty, the bed untouched, the chair still pushed under the small, chipped table. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against my bones. Just the wind, I told myself, the old building settling. But the sigh had been too human, too delicate, too familiar. Later, as twilight bled across the sky, painting the clouds in bruised purples and grays, I tried to call a colleague. I needed to hear a familiar voice, a voice untainted by the unsettling quiet of the motel. The phone felt cold in my hand, the plastic sticky. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered, thick with sleep. "William, is everything all right? It's late. Sorry to bother you, Mark," I began, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. I needed to talk. Things are a bit strange out here." "Strange how?" he asked, his tone already shifting, growing wary. I could hear the rustle of sheets, a yawn. It's the house, the journey, and this motel. It just feels off, and I keep hearing things, seeing things. I think I might be losing it, Mark." The words tumbled out, desperate, unedited. There was a pause, a significant silence that stretched. "William, I know you've been through a lot, a terrible lot, and that old house, it's bound to stir things up. Grief does that, it plays tricks. You're exhausted. You need to rest, man. Get some sleep. Don't let your mind run away with you." His words, meant to soothe, felt like a dismissal, a rubber stamp on my growing fear. Grief does that. He didn't believe me. He thought I was just unraveling, as any man might after such a loss. The conversation ended quickly, a polite but firm suggestion that I get some rest, that things would look better in the morning. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under my weight. I wrapped my arms around myself, a shiver tracing its way up my spine. The faint metallic scent from earlier intensified, becoming coppery, almost like old blood. My vision swam at the edges, her voice. Soft, lilting, just as I remembered. A phantom caress on my cheek, a breath of air that smelled of her favorite jasmine perfume. My head snapped up. He was there. She reached out a hand, a gesture of comfort, her eyes wide and full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. "No," I choked out, pushing myself back against the headboard, my hands gripping the worn fabric. "No, you're not real. This isn't real." Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't quite discern, a sound like wind chimes in a distant storm. Her face, so clear a moment, began to ripple, to distort like a reflection in disturbed water. The jasmine scent turned sickly sweet, cloying. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against them until fiery constellations burst behind my eyelids. "It's grief. It's exhaustion. You're breaking down, William." I repeated the words like a mantra, trying to anchor myself to something tangible, something rational. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. The room was still, the smell of jasmine replaced by the stale air and metallic tang. I stumbled up, my legs weak, and splashed cold water on my face from the perpetually dripping faucet. The proprietor's gaze from earlier flashed in my mind. The way he watched me, as if he knew, as if he was waiting for something. Was he a part of this, or was I truly losing my grip on reality? The condensation on the small mirror fogged, obscuring my reflection. When it cleared, a faint, almost imperceptible handprint was pressed into the glass, just above where my own face had been. It wasn't mine. I hadn't touched the mirror, and it was too small, too delicate, like hers. How could that be? The engine coughed, a wheezing protest against the night, but I pressed the pedal harder. The manor, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky, receded in my rearview mirror, shrinking until it was swallowed by the twisting road. My breath hitched, a desperate rasp in my throat. Her face, my wife's face. Distorted, rippling, a cruel parody of grief. It clung to my vision, a persistent afterimage that blurred the black asphalt into a shifting canvas of fear. I drove aimless, fueled by a primal need to put distance between myself and that house, that thing that wore her skin. Hours later, the car sputtering on fumes, I saw it. A single flickering neon sign, its M burnt out, proclaiming Odal. It stood hunched by the roadside, a forgotten sentinel shrouded by skeletal trees, miles from any town. The gravel lot was empty, save for my own dust-caked sedan. I was the only guest. A bell tinkled somewhere inside as I pushed through the warped glass door. The air was thick, smelling of stale coffee, dust, and something else, a faint, sweet decay that prickled at the back of my nose. A figure emerged from a back room, a man of indeterminate age, his face a roadmap of deep lines. His eyes, though, were too bright, too fixed. He watched me as I filled out the register, his gaze heavy, unblinking. He didn't ask for ID, didn't comment on my disheveled state. He simply slid a tarnished brass key across the counter, its tag bearing the number 3. His silence felt less like indifference and more like a profound, unsettling knowledge. I paid in cash, eager to escape his scrutiny. My room was small, a single bare bulb casting a jaundiced glow on the faded wallpaper. A thin bed, a chipped dresser, a window overlooking the same patch of desolate trees. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a holding cell. I dropped the small, locked wooden box I'd grabbed from my grandmother's study onto the bed. It was an impulsive act, a desperate grab for anything that might offer a rational explanation for the unfolding madness. I'd found the key in a hidden drawer of her desk, tucked beneath a stack of dried, brittle lavender. Sleep was a distant concept. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent a jolt through me. The silence of the motel felt like a predator listening. I sat up, my hands trembling as I picked up the box. I inserted the key, turned it. The lock gave with a soft click. Inside, beneath a handful of dried flowers and a silver thimble, was a false bottom. My fingers, clumsy with nerves, fumbled for the catch. It sprang open, revealing not coins or jewels, but a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth, the pages brittle with age. My grandmother's familiar, elegant script filled the first page. October 12th. The house breathes. I hear it, William, don't they? Or am I finally losing my mind? Just like the ones I'd heard, the ones that had grown from a barely perceptible rustle to a chorus in my own mind. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning, devouring her words. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting less precise, scratching across the paper like desperate claw marks. November 3rd. It wants more, it always wants more, the pact. It holds us, the family, our blood. What pact? With whom? My grandmother, an eccentric recluse, had always been a mystery, but this felt like something far older, far more sinister than mere eccentricity. December 1st. I see them now, the others, the faces in the glass. They mock me, they say I am next. My dreams are not my own, they are its dreams. My skin prickled. My grandmother had truly believed this. She wasn't just old and confused, he was terrified. January 15th. William, forgive me. I tried to warn I, but the threads are too strong, they pull us all in. The house. It is a mouth, and we are the offering. The final entry was a scrawl, almost illegible, the ink smeared as if by a tear or a frantic swipe of a hand. This wasn't just a haunting. This was a legacy, a terrible burden passed down through generations. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the journal. My grandmother hadn't just died, he had been consumed, and she believed I was next. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the motel, a heavy, deliberate sound directly above my room, or perhaps it was outside my door. I froze, every muscle tensed. The owner, was he watching me, listening? His bright, unblinking eyes flashed in my memory. Had he known what I would find in this box? Had he known what I was running from and what I was running to? My hands shook so violently I dropped the journal, the brittle pages scattering across the passenger seat of my car. Offering. The word echoed in my skull, a dull, insistent throb. I needed to get away from the manor, away from the dust and the shadows and the creeping sense of inherited doom. I drove until the sun began to dip, a bruised orange smear on the horizon, the landscape blurring into an indistinct wash of green and gray. Eventually, a faded neon sign flickered into view, a sagging arrow pointing towards a low-slung building. It promised vacancies, though the parking lot was empty save for my own car. This was a roadside motel, and I was clearly the only guest. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and stale cigarette smoke. I pulled into a spot directly in front of the office door, the gravel crunching loudly under the tires, the sound unnaturally amplified in the silence. Inside, a single fluorescent tube hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow over a counter cluttered with dog-eared magazines and a dusty bell. A man emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was gaunt, with eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge, too little sleep. He didn't smile. Room? His voice was a rasp. Yes, just for the night. I tried to keep my voice steady, but a tremor betrayed me. He He pushed a registration card across the counter. I filled it out, my pen scratching against the cheap paper, aware of his gaze. It wasn't accusatory, not exactly, but it felt heavy, like he was seeing through me or perhaps seeing something else. He took the card, his fingers brushing mine as he handed over a heavy brass key. Room 7. "Enjoy my stay," he said, but the words were flat, devoid of warmth, almost a warning. He watched me as I walked back to my car, his figure silhouetted in the dim light of the office. The owner was acting strange, yes, but then again, everything felt strange now. My room was small, smelling faintly of disinfectant and mildew. A thin bed, a wobbly bedside table, a television that looked like it belonged in a museum. The window overlooked a patch of scraggly weeds and the distant highway, a ribbon of black cutting through the twilight. I unpacked nothing, just sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap springs groaning under my weight. I tried to rationalize. The journal entries were old. The manor was isolated. My grief was raw, twisting my perceptions. I was exhausted, my mind playing tricks. The chorale of echoes was just a name, a morbid invention of my ancestors, a family history of madness. It was so faint at first, I almost dismissed it as the building settling, or the wind rattling the window pane. But it came again, a soft, breathy sound, like someone sighing right next to my ear. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I spun around, scanning the empty room. Nothing. The air was still heavy. My heart began to hammer, a frantic drum against my ribs. I stood, moving slowly, cautiously towards the window. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, trying to focus on the mundane, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway. And then I smelled it. Her perfume. Not the faint, ghost-like trace I sometimes imagined in the manor, but a potent, undeniable wave. Jasmine and sandalwood, her signature scent, so vivid it felt like he was standing right behind me. My lungs seized. This wasn't imagination. My voice cracked. A name. My name, spoken in her voice, but warped, elongated like a record played at the wrong speed. It was a sound that scraped against the inside of my skull, a melody of agony and perverse affection. I stumbled back, tripping over the worn carpet, my hands flailing. I hit the wall with a dull thud, the impact jarring my teeth. My gaze darted around the room, frantic, desperate for an explanation. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of her perfume, now cloying, suffocating. It was too tall, too thin, an elongated distortion that stretched towards the ceiling. It moved without sound, without effort, flowing rather than walking. My breath hitched. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was her, or it looked like her, but her eyes. They were not her eyes. It was wide, impossibly wide, stretching her lips into a grotesque rictus that revealed too many teeth, all sharp, needle-like. His head tilted an unnatural angle, and a low, guttural chuckle emanated from his throat, a sound that curdled my blood. "William," the voice hissed, his voice, yet not his voice, dripping with malice. I came. My legs gave out. I collapsed to the floor, scrabbling backwards until my back hit the wall. The creature took a step forward, then another, its movements fluid, silent, predatory. The scent of jasmine and sandalwood was now laced with something acrid, metallic, like old blood. It reached out a hand, long, skeletal fingers extending towards me. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and I could see the faint network of veins beneath. It was her hand, yet horribly wrong, devoid of the warmth, the softness I remembered. It was a parody, a mockery. It was the face of my grief twisted into a weapon. "I miss me, don't I?" The thing purred, its head still tilted at that impossible angle, the black pits of its eyes fixed on me. "I miss I, too." Its fingers brushed my cheek. I gasped, unable to scream, unable to move. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't grief. This was a direct, malevolent presence. It had followed me. It was here, it was real, the offering. It waits. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I was alone, shivering violently, my cheeks still burning from the phantom touch. My throat was raw. My heart felt like it would explode. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just a legacy. It was me. It was targeting me. Where could I possibly go that it wouldn't follow? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. My throat was raw. I scrambled backwards, away from the bed, stumbling over the rug. The phantom touch lingered, a chill burn on my cheek. It had been there. I wasn't mad. Not yet. The room, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the overhead light, felt too small, too solid, too normal after what I'd just experienced. I needed out. Now. My hands trembled as I threw clothes into my duffel bag, not caring about order. The air in the manor felt thick, heavy with unseen eyes, with the weight of generations of forgotten things. I could almost hear a faint, distant hum, a low thrumming that vibrated in my teeth. My grandmother's house wasn't just old. It was a hungry maw, and I was caught in its throat. I had to escape its immediate grasp, just long enough to understand what was happening. I drove until the early hours, the manor's silhouette shrinking in my rearview mirror until it vanished entirely. The road was a black ribbon unspooling under the headlights, and I clung to it, my grip tight on the steering wheel. The further I got, the less intense the hum became, but it never quite faded. It felt lodged somewhere deep inside my skull. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, but sleep felt impossible, a dangerous surrender. Finally, the dawn began to paint the sky in bruised purples and grays. A flickering neon sign appeared, a beacon in the gloom, motel. It was a single-story structure, faded paint peeling from its clapboard walls, nestled precariously close to the highway. The gravel lot was empty save for my car. I pulled in, the crunch of the stones under my tires sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. The door to the office was propped open with a chipped ceramic mug. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something else, something vaguely metallic like old coins or rust. A bell chimed faintly as I stepped over the threshold. Behind a cluttered counter, a man with a heavy-lidded gaze and a faded flannel shirt slowly raised his head. He looked at me, a long, assessing stare that made the hairs on my arms prickle. He was the owner, acting strange. "Just you?" he rasped, his voice like gravel. I nodded. He pushed a yellowed registration card across the counter. "Only guest tonight." His eyes never left mine as I scribbled my name, William, and a false address. He slid a heavy brass key across the counter. Room 7. At the end, he didn't ask for payment up front. He simply watched me, a faint, unsettling smile playing on his lips. My room was sparsely furnished, a lumpy bed, a scarred dresser, a television set that looked like it belonged in a museum. The window looked out onto a patch of scrubland and the distant hum of the highway. I drew the thin curtains, plunging the room into a dim, uneasy light. My phone's battery was almost dead. I needed to find a public library, somewhere with internet access, with old archives. I needed answers, and I needed them yesterday. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of frantic research. The nearest town was small, its library even smaller, but the librarian, a kindly woman with spectacles perched on her nose, was helpful, pointing me towards local history sections and old newspaper microfiches. I devoured every scrap of information I could find, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the gnawing fear that whispered at the edges of my mind. I started with the house itself, then my family name. The manor had a long, spotty history. There were mentions of peculiar incidents and unexplained disappearances in the early 1900s, vague reports of residents simply vanishing, leaving behind untouched meals and open books. A local historian's journal, bound in crumbling leather, spoke of the manor's isolation, describing it as a place where the veil between worlds thins. It was all so frustratingly imprecise, hinting at something monstrous without ever naming it. Then I found it, buried in a collection of local folklore and superstitions. It wasn't a ghost, not a beast, but something far more insidious. The legend claimed it fed on grief, on loneliness, on despair. It targeted those who were already broken, like me. My grandmother's name appeared in a few entries, not in connection to the disappearances, but in articles about her eccentricities, her reclusive nature. She wasn't just an eccentric, he was part of this. My family wasn't just haunted, they were involved. I kept digging, my eyes burning, my head throbbing. The librarian offered me a glass of water, her gaze concerned. I just shook my head, my focus absolute. I scanned through old obituaries, birth records, anything that might connect the dots. My great-aunt, I discovered, had been institutionalized for profound melancholia and delusional episodes after her husband's disappearance. My great-uncle had simply vanished during a hunting trip, his rifle found leaning against a tree, his footprints stopping abruptly in the soft earth. The pattern was undeniable. Disappearances, madness, always connected to the manor, to the woods, the chorale of echoes. It wasn't just taking lives, it was taking what made a life. It was taking me. The owner hadn't reappeared. I lay on the lumpy bed, the folklore book open on my chest, its pages smelling of dust and age. I was no closer to understanding how to fight it, only what it was. Was I meant to be the next offering? The room, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the single bulb, seemed to pulse with a low, inaudible hum. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp caught in my throat. The phantom touch still prickled my cheek, a cold brand. It had been real. I was not imagining it, not yet. I scrambled back away from the bed, my feet tangled in the worn threads of the rug. A sharp pain shot through my knee as I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. The wall was cold, rough plaster, not the smooth wallpaper I remembered from moments before. My eyes darted around the room. The dresser was gone. This wasn't the master bedroom. It wasn't my room. It wasn't any room I recognized in the manor. Panic, a clawed beast, began to tear at my chest. I had to get out. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and lunged for the door. The brass knob was frigid under my palm. I twisted it. Locked, no response. I could hear nothing beyond the frantic thrum of my own pulse. I backed away, surveying the room again. It was small, cramped. A thin, stained mattress on a metal frame. A chipped porcelain sink in the corner. This wasn't the manor. It couldn't be. Where was I? How had I gotten here? A memory, faint and flickering, tried to surface. The roar of an engine, the gravel crunching under tires. A sense of frantic urgency of needing to escape. Had I driven? I must have. I had to have left. The memory felt flimsy, like old paper crumbling at the edges. I tried the door again, harder this time. The wood groaned, but held. My mind raced, trying to piece together the last coherent moments. Her scent, so real, so agonizingly close. And then the touch. Had I run? Had I just gotten into the car and driven until my hands ached on the wheel? Suddenly, a dull thud came from outside the door, followed by the clink of keys. My breath caught. Footsteps, slow and dragging, approached. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The door creaked open, revealing a sliver of hallway. A gaunt figure stood there, silhouetted against a dim, flickering fluorescent light. It was a man, elderly, with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that seemed to hold ancient, weary secrets. He wore a faded work shirt and suspenders. "Rough night, mister," the owner rasped, his voice like gravel. He didn't wait for an answer, merely stared at me with an unnerving stillness. Didn't even hear I pull up. I swallowed, my throat dry. Where am I?" He gave a slow, deliberate blink. "Roadside motel, only guest we've had in weeks. Thought I might appreciate the quiet." His gaze lingered, a prickle of unease crawling over my skin. I look like I've seen a ghost. I forced a laugh, a dry, reedy sound that didn't reach my eyes. Something like that. He just nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "Room's paid up for as long as I need it." He didn't ask how I paid or who paid, he just knew. Then he turned, the keys jingling softly as he shuffled away, the door clicking shut behind him. He didn't lock it. I stood there for a long moment, the strange encounter leaving me more disoriented than before. Roadside motel. I must have driven for hours in a daze. Relief, a fragile tendril, began to unfurl in my chest. I had escaped. I was out. I was safe. I walked to the window, pulling back the thin, grimy curtain. Outside was a stretch of cracked asphalt, a few dead weeds pushing through the cracks. No other cars, no other rooms lit. The owner hadn't been lying. The air outside looked thick, heavy, like a blanket of old dust. I turned from the window, a strange sense of unease still clinging to me despite the supposed escape. The room felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I walked to the door again. This time I twisted the knob. It turned freely. I pulled. The door opened onto the same narrow, fluorescent-lit hallway. Good, I could leave. When it did, the hallway seemed to have stretched. The door I had just exited was further away. Its number 7, now a blurred smear. Down the hall where the owner had disappeared was a solid wall. No exit, no lobby, just a dead end. I spun around. The door to my room was gone. In its place, another identical door, numbered 7. I tried the knob. My breath hitched. This was not right. I tried to remember the way I'd come in, the turns, the layout. Nothing. It was a blank. My palms began to sweat. I tried the door again, frantically rattling the knob. It wouldn't budge. The fluorescent light above me buzzed, a high-pitched whine that grated on my nerves. "You thought you could leave?" My head snapped around. Just the endless, stretching hallway. The walls seemed to ripple, the faded wallpaper shifting, the patterns swirling like water. My stomach lurched. This wasn't a motel. This was impossible. The house hadn't let me go. It had merely changed its skin, molded itself into this new prison. The owner, his ancient eyes, his knowing gaze, he was part of it, a phantom, another echo. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to clear the fog. Was this real? Was any of it real? The car ride, the motel sign, the owner's gravelly voice, were they just fragments, illusions spun from the house's malevolent will? I could hear it now, a faint, disembodied chorus of voices like distant, mournful singing. It was the chorale. It was here, with me. And it was laughing. How many layers of illusion did I have to peel away before I found myself again? My head snapped around. My stomach lurched. This was impossible. It had merely changed its skin, molded itself into this. Then the fluorescent hum overhead flickered, buzzing, and the patterns on the wall settled. The dizzying motion ceased. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the sudden silence. It was a motel, or it looked like one. A long, narrow corridor lined with faded doors, each numbered in peeling paint. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood and cheap disinfectant. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the frantic drum beneath my palm. My vision swam for a moment, the edges of the hallway blurring. Was I going mad? Had I finally snapped? I stumbled forward, my legs rubbery, until I reached the counter. A bell, brass and tarnished, sat beside a worn guest book. My fingers trembled as I pressed it. The chime was shrill, cutting through the oppressive quiet. A door behind the counter creaked open. The owner emerged. He was a gaunt man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a startling, pale blue that seemed to hold too much light or too little. He wore a stained apron over a flannel shirt. A faint, unsettling smile stretched his lips, showing teeth that were a little too long, a little too sharp. "Looking for a room, are we?" His voice was gravelly, like stones grinding together. He didn't blink, not once. "Yes," I managed, my voice hoarse. "Just for the night I was driving." "Of course you were." The smile widened just a fraction. "Only guests tonight, always are this time of year." He slid the guest book towards me. It was open to a blank page. The previous entries were too far back, yellowed and indecipherable. My pen scratched against the paper, filling in my name, William, and the date. My hand shook, making the letters uneven. The owner watched, his pale eyes fixed on my every movement. His finger, long and bony, tapped the page just beneath my signature. "From the old place, aren't you? The manor." My head snapped up. How could he know? I just inherited it. His smile softened, a grotesque parody of warmth. "Ah, the inheritor. Yes, I knew you'd come eventually. They always do." He leaned closer, his breath a faint, sweet decay. "It calls to its own, doesn't it? Like a song." A knot tightened in my gut. "What are you talking about?" He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "The pact, the understanding, generations of your line, William, always one, always the chosen." He straightened, moving with an unnatural fluidity that made my skin crawl. "Your grandmother, she kept it quiet, better than some, but the house remembers, the thing remembers." He picked up a heavy, tarnished brass key from a hook, the number 7 etched deeply into its head. "Room 7, it's suitable." He pushed it across the counter. "What thing?" The owner's smile vanished. His face became utterly blank, his pale eyes like chips of ice. "Some truths are best discovered alone, William, in the quiet, when the echoes begin to sing." He gestured vaguely down the hall. 7, at the end." I clutched the key, my grip tight. The air in the lobby seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, like rust on the tongue. I couldn't breathe. I turned and walked, my steps heavy, the floorboards groaning beneath me. Each door I passed seemed to pulse with a faint internal light like embers behind thin wood. Room 7 was at the very end. It slid into the lock with a soft click. Inside, the room was small, cramped. A single bed covered by a thin, stained duvet, a cheap dresser, its veneer peeling. A small, square window looked out onto nothing but a patch of overgrown weeds and a splintered fence. My knees buckled. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the springs groaning in protest. The room was a trap. The motel was a trap, the owner a grotesque gatekeeper. His words replayed in my mind, "The pact, always the chosen." I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands into them until stars exploded behind my lids. My family, my grandmother, the house. It wasn't just haunted, not in the way I understood. It was a legacy, a burden. They hadn't just lived there, they had served something, and the pact made generations ago. Was it for power or to escape a different, worse fate? The owner's words implied a choice, a desperate bargain. And now it was my turn, the inheritor, the chosen. I was not just a victim, but the designated anchor, the host. It wasn't a word, just a sound, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from inside my own skull. The lilies, stronger now, almost suffocating. My wife's scent, a cruel, mocking embrace. I sprang up, gasping, my eyes wide open. The room was the same, but the air was heavy charged. My skin prickled. I felt watched, not just by the owner, but by something formless, ancient, waiting. It had always been waiting for me. What did the pact demand? What horror did it avert? And what would happen to me when the payment came due? My resolve felt brittle, but it was there, sharp and painful in my chest. The pact, the entity, me, no, I wouldn't be another link in their chain. I wouldn't serve. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the ignition, the old engine catching with a hesitant cough. The gravel crunched under the tires as I reversed, the manor looming in the rearview mirror, its darkened windows like vacant eyes. I pressed the accelerator, the car lurching forward, leaving the oppressive shadow of the house behind. The road was a ribbon of black unwinding through the endless, whispering trees. I drove, the speedometer needle hovering at a reckless speed, the wind a dull roar against the windows, hours blurred. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges that felt too vivid, too unnatural. My eyes burned, but I couldn't stop, couldn't look back. Every rustle in the woods, every shadow cast by a passing sign seemed to hold a hint of the house's malevolence. I needed to disappear, to find somewhere anonymous where the air didn't taste of dust and forgotten grief. Eventually, a flickering neon sign cut through the encroaching gloom. Vacancy. A roadside motel. It looked like a relic, its paint peeling, but it was light. It was civilization. I pulled into the gravel lot, the only car besides a beat-up pickup truck parked near the office. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something vaguely metallic, like old pennies. A chime tinkled as I pushed open the office door. The walls were covered in faded floral wallpaper, stained with what looked like generations of spilled coffee. He was thin with a stoop to his shoulders, and his eyes, set deep in a web of wrinkles, seemed to hold an unsettling stillness. They didn't quite focus on me. "Room?" he rasped, his voice like gravel. "Yes, just one night." I managed, my voice rough from disuse. He slid a register across the counter. He didn't check. He just stared past me, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the door. I found room 7. The lock was stiff, protesting with a groan before giving way. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of stale cigarettes and something else, something cloying and sweet like dying flowers. The room was small, a single saggy bed, a chipped nightstand, and a television set with rabbit ears. A thin curtain covered the window, obscuring whatever lay beyond. I dropped my bag, the thud echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet space. My chest ached with exhaustion, but sleep felt impossible. The water from the tap was lukewarm, smelling faintly of sulfur. As I scrubbed, I tried to focus on the mundane, on the simple act of cleansing. But the quiet hum of the motel's ancient plumbing seemed to shift, to subtly alter its pitch. It sounded less like water, more like a distant, low murmur. The sweet, cloying smell was stronger now, making my stomach clench. I pulled back the curtain, hoping for a view of the quiet road, a glimpse of normalcy. Instead, I saw the trees, not the distant, blurred trees of the roadside, but the dense, ancient forest that surrounded the manor. The air outside the glass was thick with an unnatural fog, swirling and churning. How could this be? I had driven for hours. It was the chorale, a chorus of voices, layered and indistinct, like memories trying to surface, struggling to form words. My skin prickled. This wasn't just in the house. It was here. It was everywhere. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. The floral wallpaper began to ripple, the patterns shifting, the roses twisting into grotesque, gaping mouths. The air grew heavy, thick, as if I was submerged in something viscous. I could feel a presence, an immense, unseen weight in the room, pushing down on me. It was like a breath, icy and laden with the scent of loam and grave dust. My breath hitched. I could feel it, a physical touch. I lashed out, batting at the empty air, but my hand met nothing. The room began to spin. The floor tilted, the bed slid, the television crashed to the floor, its screen shattering with a dull thud that was swallowed by the overwhelming sound of the chorale. I lost my footing, falling hard onto my knees. A powerful force, invisible but undeniable, seized my ankle. It wasn't a hand, not a rope, but a sensation of being gripped, pulled with immense strength. I cried out, clawing at the worn carpet, trying to resist. The force dragged me across the floor, scraping my skin, pulling me towards the window, towards the impossibly close, menacing trees. My head slammed against the wall. Stars exploded behind my eyes, not from fatigue but from impact. The chorale roared now, a symphony of torment and triumph. I felt myself being lifted, not gently, but with brutal force, my body twisting, wrenching. I was no longer in the motel room. The walls blurred, the air turned to static. Then a sudden jarring stop. I hit something hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. My vision swam, but the sweet, cloying smell was back, stronger than ever. I pushed myself up, my limbs aching, my head throbbing. I was back in the manor. In the grand hall, the heavy oak door to the outside stood shut just as I had left it. The dust motes danced in the sliver of moonlight filtering through a high window. The motel key, the one with the number 7, was gone. Just gone. My escape had been a cruel illusion, a momentary dream spun to mock me. How could it have brought me back? Something intangible, something wrong, snaked around my ankle. It wasn't cold, not precisely, but it carried the memory of ice, a phantom chill that prickled my skin and made my leg twitch. I stumbled back, gasping, my hand flying out to brace against the flimsy wall of the roadside motel room. The cheap wood paneling felt greasy under my palm. I was here then, or here was here. The world outside the manor had lost its edges, smeared into a single, frantic escape. The drive had been a blur of headlights and the constant, nagging whisper of the passenger seat. I remembered pulling into the gravel lot. A sign, a rusted, winking neon vacancy that seemed to mock me. The owner, a thin man with eyes too wide and a smile too eager, had handed me a key. He'd watched me walk to the door, his gaze a physical weight on my back, even after I'd slammed it shut. I hadn't seen him since, but I felt him, a presence just beyond the peeling paint of my door. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. A single, grimy window looked out onto nothing but the highway, a constant low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. The air conditioner rattled a monotonous rhythm struggling against the humid night. I was sure of it. My breath hitched. That tendril, whatever it was, had vanished, or had it ever been there? My hand trembled as I ran it over my ankle, feeling only the rough fabric of my jeans. My mind felt like a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a different, terrifying possibility. Was I truly here? Or was this another distortion, another trick of the corail? The name echoed in my skull, no longer a foreign concept, but a festering wound, a certainty. The journals lay splayed across the stained bedspread, their ancient pages brittle and yellowed. I'd snatched them in my flight, the only things that felt real, substantial in that crumbling house of lies. My grandmother's elegant, precise script, alongside the frantic, almost illegible scrawls of her ancestors, detailed generations of a horrific bargain. I'd been poring over them for hours, days I couldn't tell anymore. Time had become a fluid, meaningless thing. My head throbbed. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands into my sockets. When I opened them, the words on the page seemed to shimmer, to writhe. No, not shimmer. They moved. Tiny black specks like iron filings drawn by a magnet danced across the text. Was it my vision, or was the ink itself alive? Consume, anchor, host. I mumbled, tracing the words with a shaking finger. It wasn't just about haunting me, about driving me mad. It wanted me. It wanted my mind, my memories, my very self to become its new vessel, to solidify its presence in this reality. It needed an anchor, a living, breathing, conscious conduit to truly manifest, to fully cross over. And I, William, the last of the line, was the designated host. I remembered the feeling from the manor, the pressure, the immense weight. It wasn't just in the room, it was trying to become the room. It was trying to become me. My eyes scanned the pages again, desperate, searching for an escape. There had to be something. My grandmother, for all her complicity, had hinted at it. A countermeasure, a way to sever the connection, to deny it its anchor. It was buried in the convoluted symbolism, the archaic language, the half-mad ravings of a man who'd tried and failed. The mirror, the fractured reflection. It spoke of a specific object, something tied to the family, to my family. Not a sacrifice of blood, not exactly, but a sacrifice of connection, a severing, a key, a focus. It needed to be broken, shattered, to disrupt the anchor point, to fragment its hold. I remembered something. A small, ornate locket my grandmother always wore. It was silver, intricately carved, and she told me it held the first reflection. I dismissed it as a sentimental trinket. The locket. It was meant to be passed down. It was with me. I'd found it among her things, tucked into a velvet pouch, a final inheritance I hadn't understood. My hands fumbled through my satchel, tossing aside clothes, a half-eaten granola bar, until my fingers brushed against cool metal. It was heavier than I remembered, cool against my skin. It felt charged. The owner's laugh, a dry, rattling sound, seemed to drift from the wall beside me. Or was it just the air conditioner? My breath caught. I pressed the locket into my palm, its edges digging in. This was it. This was the ritual, but what would happen if I shattered it? What would happen if I failed? The phantom chill tightened its grip on my ankle, not a physical touch, but a cold memory that made my leg buckle. I crashed against the flimsy wall of the roadside motel room, the peeling floral wallpaper rough against my palm. My breath hitched, a dry, ragged sound in the sudden, absolute silence. The hum of the ancient air conditioner had died. The distant drone of trucks on the highway, a constant companion since I'd checked in, had vanished. The room was a tomb. I yanked my foot back, the sensation dissolving as quickly as it had appeared, leaving a tingling numbness that crawled up my calf. My eyes darted around the cramped space. Nothing. Just the faded carpet, the scarred dresser, the television set that hadn't worked since I arrived. But the air was heavy, thick with a scent I knew too well, damp earth and something metallic like old pennies left in stagnant water. It was the smell of the manor. It was the smell of her. A low thrum began, not in my ears, but behind them, a vibration that resonated in my teeth. The light fixture above flickered, a bare bulb swinging slightly as if caught in a draft that wasn't there. The cheap print on the wall, a cheerful, generic landscape, began to ripple. The painted trees stretched, their branches twisting into impossibly thin, claw-like appendages. The blue of the sky bled into a bruised purple, and the distant, painted mountains seemed to loom, their peaks sharpening into jagged teeth. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't just my mind playing tricks anymore. This was a physical violation of reality. I stumbled towards the door, my hand fumbling for the cold metal of the knob. It was already turning. The The door swung inward with a groan that wasn't the usual sticky sound of the motel's cheap hinges. It was a deeper, older groan like ancient timber settling. Standing there, silhouetted against a deepening twilight that seemed to swallow the entire world, was the owner. He wasn't smiling. His face, usually a mask of forced cheerfulness, was slack, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on something beyond me. It's time. Behind him, the familiar, dingy corridor of the motel had vanished. A faint, discordant music, like 1,000 broken harps, began to play from deep within the impossible hallway. I shoved past the owner, who didn't resist, merely swayed, his vacant eyes following me. The brass key clattered to the floor as I burst into the spectral corridor. The tapestries on the walls depicted scenes I'd glimpsed in my grandmother's journal. Stylized figures with elongated limbs, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe, and always at the center a gaping maw. This was it, the crossing. The entity wasn't just in the manor, it was everywhere. It was pulling me in. I ran, my breath hitched, each gasp burning my lungs. The hallway stretched endlessly, distorting, twisting, the walls leaning inward as if trying to crush me. My wife's voice, laughing, then crying, then screaming, no, not real. Not real. I gripped the small, leather-bound journal I'd clutched since leaving the manor, its worn cover pressing into my palm. Inside were the symbols, the words, the counter-ritual I'd pieced together from my grandmother's frantic, half-mad entries. It was a desperate gamble, a reversal of the pact, a severing. I had to reach the heart of the house, the central chamber where the pact had been forged. The hallway abruptly ended, opening into a vast, cavernous space. This wasn't the grand foyer I remembered. This was something else entirely. The ceiling was impossibly high, lost in perpetual gloom, and the walls seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly green light. The air was thick with the metallic tang, now mixed with something cloying, sweet like wilting lilies. In the center of the chamber, a swirling vortex of shimmering gray mist churned. Within its depths, I saw flickers of things, distorted faces, skeletal hands reaching, glimpses of rooms I knew but twisted, broken, bleeding into one another, the parlor where the furniture was melting into the floorboards. The journal felt like a lead weight in my hand. I had to find the focal point, the symbol carved into the stone where the ancient family had first pledged their blood. I scanned the floor, ignoring the phantom touches on my skin, the icy breath on my neck. There, amidst the chaos of splintered floorboards and crumbling stone, a raised dais, the altar. I climbed onto the dais, my hands trembling as I opened the journal to the marked page. The symbols stared back at me, stark and unsettling. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. It felt like a physical pressure trying to push the words from my mind. No, I gasped, digging my fingernails into my palms. The pain helped anchor me. No. I began to speak, my voice weak at first, then gaining strength, pushing back against the encroaching cacophony. The words were ancient, guttural, unfamiliar, but they felt right on my tongue. As I spoke, the obsidian slab beneath my hands began to vibrate, a low hum that quickly intensified. The swirling mist in the center of the chamber pulsed, its grays deepening to black, then flashing with an angry electric blue, then impossibly hot. My skin prickled, then burned. The faces in the mist pressed closer, their mouths open in silent roars. And then my wife's, "You don't know what you're doing." My voice faltered. Was it her? Was it a trick? The ritual, I had to finish it. My hands pressed harder against the cold stone, the words tumbling from my lips, a desperate plea, a furious defiance. The chamber groaned, the very walls seeming to buckle inward. Dust rained down, thick and choking. The pressure was immense, crushing. I could feel something trying to tear the words from my throat, to rip the journal from my grasp. But I wouldn't stop. I couldn't. The entire chamber shuddered, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. The vortex in the center swelled, reaching out with tendrils of inky blackness. A sudden, violent surge of energy slammed into me, throwing me back against the dais. My head hit the stone with a sickening crack, and for a moment the world dissolved into a blinding white pain. When my vision cleared, the chamber was a maelstrom. The air was thick with flying debris, shards of glass, splinters of wood, all caught in an invisible tempest. It was a roar, a howl of pure, unadulterated fury that ripped through the very fabric of the house, shaking it to its foundations. Had I done it, or had I only angered it? The air solidified. One moment the granite walls of the chamber had been groaning, dust choking my breath. The other, the sound simply ceased. Not faded, not muffled, ceased. And I was no longer there. My eyes blinked open to a different kind of grime. A ceiling of water-stained acoustic tiles, a single bare bulb hanging by its fraying cord. The metallic tang of old pennies and something else, something cloying and sweet like dying flowers, assaulted my nose. I was on my back, sprawled across a threadbare rug that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and desperation. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent drum against my skull. This wasn't the manor. This wasn't the chamber. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, a cold sweat slicking my skin. The room was small, cramped, a saggy double bed, its floral pattern faded into a ghostly blur, dominated one wall. A chipped formica table held a rotary phone that looked like an antique. The window, grimy with road dust, overlooked a stretch of cracked asphalt and a distant, skeletal pine. Beyond that, nothing but the vast, indifferent darkness of night. A roadside motel. That's what it was. A low, single-story structure, its neon sign oasis in missing half its letters, flickering erratically in the distance. The kind of place I pass without a second glance, the kind of place that swallows I whole. How had I arrived here? The ritual, the words, the collapsing chamber. It was all a blur, a fractured memory refusing to coalesce. Had I escaped? Or had I been moved? I stumbled to the door, my hand reaching for the knob, but a sudden sound froze me. A low cough, then the rustle of paper from beyond the thin wall separating my room from what must have been the office. I pressed my ear against the painted wood. A radio hummed, a tinny country tune. I felt it. The utter stillness of the place, the way the night seemed to press in on this lonely outpost. No other cars, no distant traffic hum. It moved slowly, deliberately towards my room, its gaze seemingly fixed on the window. It was the owner. I knew it with a sickening certainty. The way the shoulders slumped, the unnaturally long stride, the way it carried itself like a forgotten memory given flesh. My breath hitched. I backed away from the window, pressing myself against the wall opposite the door. The owner wasn't just walking past, it was observing. A sense of being watched, of being known, settled over me like a shroud. The air in the small room grew heavy, thick with unseen pressure. I could feel the entity, the chorale of echoes. It hadn't been banished. It hadn't been contained. It had merely shifted the stage. This motel, this desolate place, was its new nexus, and I was still its intended host. The radio in the office clicked off. The abrupt silence was more jarring than any noise, not from the wall, not from the air, but from inside my own head. "William, my wife, my beloved." "No," I choked out, pressing my palms against my temples. "You're not real." The whisper intensified, weaving through my thoughts like tendrils of smoke. It wasn't just her voice, it was our memories. The first time we met, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her hand in mine. Each memory, once a source of comfort, now twisted, corrupted, played back with a subtle, horrifying discord. A laugh that ended in a sob, a loving glance that held a flicker of contempt. The room began to waver. The cheap wallpaper seemed to ripple, the faded floral patterns stretching and contracting. Each flicker brought a subtle change. The bed was slightly closer, the table slightly further. The walls leaned inward, then outward. My stomach churned. This was it. Its true form wasn't a monstrous shape, but a dissolution of reality itself, a parasitic invasion of my perception. It fed on my grief, on my love, on the very fabric of my mind. "Give in, William, let us in. We are all you have left." The chorus of voices swelled, a dissonant symphony of echoes, each one a fragment of a lost loved one, a stolen memory. My grandmother's stern admonitions, my father's booming laughter, all warped into a grotesque invitation. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to anchor myself. The rough texture of the wall against my back, the metallic tang in the air. I needed something real, but even those sensations began to fray. The rough wall became smooth, slick. The metallic tang transmuted into the cloying sweetness of rot. I opened my eyes. The room was no longer a room. It was a kaleidoscope of fractured images. The manor's grand hall, the chamber's ancient stones, a sun-drenched field where my wife and I had once picnicked. All swirling, merging, separating. The entity wasn't just outside me, it was inside me, trying to dismantle the very architecture of my being. This was the final bait. To save her, I had to let it in to become its host, to become another devoured memory. But he was already gone. This was a simulacrum, a weapon forged from my deepest anguish. A wave of nausea washed over me, my knees buckling. I fell to the floor, my hands scrabbling for purchase on the shifting carpet. No, I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. I wouldn't let it twist her memory into this vile instrument. The ritual, the banishment, it wasn't about words alone. It was about cost. My grandmother's journals, the cryptic warnings, the price paid by generations. They spoke of severing, of a fragment of self offered to appease, to contain. What did it want? What did it truly crave? Not just a host, but the source of the host, the wellspring of emotion, the core of identity that made a host viable. My grief, my memories of her. That was the anchor point, the open, wounded, exploited. A horrifying clarity descended upon me. To banish it, to contain it, I had to cut it off from its primary food source. I had to sever the connection to my grief, to the very memories it was using against me. Not to forget her, but to sever the pain of her loss, the consuming sorrow that made me vulnerable. It would be a sacrifice of a different kind. A part of my soul, perhaps. A part of what made me, me. The cacophony of voices swelled to an unbearable shriek, each one a knife edge against my sanity. The room pulsed, a living, breathing thing. You want my memories? I screamed, my voice raw, defiant. You want my pain? Take it, take the conduit, but you won't take me, asterisk. I focused all my will, all my remaining resolve on the image of my wife, and then with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I pushed. I envisioned a clean cut, a severing of the tendrils that bound my grief to the entity, a cauterization of the wound it fed upon. A searing pain lanced through my mind, a tearing sensation as if a part of my very consciousness was being ripped away. I arched my back, a guttural cry escaping my lips. It was a violation, a self-mutilation of the most profound kind. The echoes in my head intensified, a final, desperate struggle, then began to recede like a tide pulling back from the shore. The room snapped back into place. The cheap wallpaper, the saggy bed, the chipped table. The bare bulb glowed steadily. The metallic tang of old pennies returned, mixed with the faint sweetness of dying flowers. Silent. I lay gasping on the floor, my body trembling, drenched in sweat. The headache was gone, replaced by a vast, aching emptiness where something vital used to be. My mind felt quiet, too quiet. I thought of her, my wife. I could recall her face, her name, the events of our life together. But the emotion, the raw, visceral agony of her loss, it wasn't there. It was like looking at a photograph, perfectly clear but devoid of the warmth, the resonance that once made it alive. I had sacrificed the pain. I had sacrificed the grief. I had sacrificed the conduit. But what else had I lost in that brutal severing? And how much of William remained? My eyes peeled open to a flat, gray ceiling, unfamiliar and stained. A faint hum vibrated through the thin mattress beneath me, a constant, low thrum that burrowed behind my eardrums. I blinked, the light from a single, grimy window slicing across my vision. Where was I? The last thing I remembered was the cold, the tendrils, the desperate push. A name, my wife's name, a shield forged from sorrow and love. Had it worked? I pushed myself upright, a dull ache blooming in my chest. My head throbbed, a steady, insistent rhythm that mirrored the hum. The room was small, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and something metallic like old coins. A cheap dresser, a television set from a forgotten decade, a single plastic chair. I was in a roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange. My clothes were different. A faded blue t-shirt and loose-fitting trousers, not the heavy, damp fabrics I remembered from the manor. My hands were clean, no grit beneath the nails, no cuts or scrapes. Too clean. It felt wrong, like a stage prop. I ran a hand over my jaw, a rough stubble rasped against my palm. How long had I been here? I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet meeting a threadbare carpet. The chills seeped into my soles. I leaned closer, trying to pinpoint it, but it vanished, leaving only my exhausted face staring back. Was it just the poor lighting or something else entirely? A knock, light and hesitant, startled me. Who would be knocking? The owner, perhaps. I remembered the brief, unsettling interaction upon my arrival. A gaunt figure with eyes that seemed to track movements even when not looking directly at me, a smile that never quite reached their eyes. They had handed me a key, then lingered, watching me walk to my room, their head tilted just slightly. The knock came again, a little firmer. "Everything all right in there?" A reedy voice called out. It was the owner. Their voice sounded, stretched like an old rubber band. I listened, straining to hear footsteps receding, but there was nothing. No sound of movement. Only the faint, persistent hum of the building. Had they gone? Or were they still standing there just beyond the door, listening? I felt exposed. I walked to the window, pulling back the thin curtain. Outside, a bleak landscape of cracked asphalt and skeletal trees stretched to a horizon swallowed by a bruised sky. My car wasn't there. No car at all. How had I arrived? My memory was a fractured mosaic, pieces missing, others distorted. I remembered the desperate surge of defiance, the image of my wife, the raw power of grief turned weapon. I remembered a blinding flash, a rending sound that tore at existence, and then, nothing, just this room, this strange, quiet room. I dressed quickly, pulling on the unfamiliar clothes. They fit but felt alien, not mine. My wallet was in the pocket, surprisingly. Cash, identification. My name, William, staring back from the plastic. It felt like a relic from another life. I stepped out into the narrow corridor. The hum was louder, more insistent, vibrating in the floorboards. It felt like the very walls were alive, a giant, unseen mechanism churning slowly. I walked towards the front desk, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The owner wasn't there. The small, cluttered office was empty. A single bare bulb cast a harsh light on a stack of yellowed newspapers and a tarnished bell. I rang it. A door creaked open behind me, and I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The owner emerged from a back room, wiping their hands on a dishcloth. That unsettling smile played on their lips. "Something I need, William?" they asked, their voice unnervingly soft. They knew my name, of course, from the check-in, but the way they said it, the slight pause, felt like a caress. "My car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where is it, and how did I get here?" The owner's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a little too long. "My car," they chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "I didn't have one, William. A kind stranger dropped I off, said I was disoriented, needed a place to rest." A stranger, no face, no voice, no memory. It's still there, William. I had left it in the throes of a desperate battle, a reality-bending confrontation. How could it be exactly as I left it? Unless... A sudden, sharp pain lanced through my head, behind my eyes. It wasn't a headache. It was a pressure, like something was trying to push its way out or in. The humming intensified, a high-pitched whine that resonated deep within my skull. I clutched my temples, swaying. The owner stepped closer, their smile never faltering. "Rest." The pain subsided as quickly as it came, leaving behind a faint echo, a lingering sense of something vast and terrible just beneath the surface of my consciousness. I looked at the owner, their face a mask of false concern. I saw it then in the depths of their eyes, not a reflection of the motel, but a shimmer of something else entirely, something ancient, something familiar. The push had worked, yes. I had severed the connection, I thought, but what if I hadn't destroyed it? What if in my desperate act of defiance I had merely absorbed it? The humming in the motel, the strange blankness in my memory, the flicker in my own reflection, the owner's knowing gaze. I was the only guest, yes, but was I truly alone?